Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a wonderful day so far, and thank you so much for being here. I always like to start the same way, which is you could have been in any pavilion, you could have been in any meeting, you could have been in a cafe, you could have been sitting down with an inspiring person one-on-one. So I really thank you for your time and breath and little piece of life that you've given to us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's session continues in the series of the G20 GLI engaging with faith groups and religious communities. Today's session is particularly exciting because it also marks the launch of a stocktake process that has been conducted over the last year, which I'll be speaking about. And I think first to always say, and with every single session that we've had on faith and land restoration, that at its core, land restoration is a sacred act. And when we restore ecosystems, we're not only restoring the land, we're restoring our connection back to the nature we are part of. We're restoring our connection back to this ancient language of restoration that all faith communities have always known. And we're also restoring our humanity with it. And we also know that there's a big gap in what we need to do to restore land and to meet the G20 targets. And within that, we know that faith can be a bridge for action. Faith can be the bridge between what our values are, and we also trust and know that every single person here at this COP, because they're here, we trust they have the values to restore, but how do we bring those values back into action? And what we're going to be also showcasing today is how faith communities have always done that, and what can that look like in an accelerated manner. But I also want to put a frame of, whilst it's values, it's also the real work of restoration. Religious institutions, faith communities are quite significant stakeholders in global restoration efforts. If I look at some of the statistics, religious institutions own approximately 8% of all habitable land globally. We know that faith-based organizations control over 70% of all commercial forests worldwide. We also know that faith institutions manage roughly 10% of all global financial investments. Yes, it's about values, but we're also talking about a group of land restoration actors that are doing one incredible work around the world, but also are really critical and key to bridging the gaps that we also face. And part of our engagement at the G20 GLI has been, over the last year, to be speaking to many of these faith communities. And there we go. Technical issues. Lorenzo, I don't know if someone can help with the slides. Sorry. So part of the work of the G20 GLI has been over the last year to be speaking to many different faith actors in the space. So since January this year and across now the 3 different COPs, the UN General Assembly, faith meetings and groups, we've engaged with over 100 different faith-based organizations, some of which we've sat down with one-on-one, attended meetings, thank you very much, attended meetings, but also conducted a survey. And in the actors we've engaged, it's encompassed faith-based actors represent over 600 million adherents around the world. And this stocktake has also looked at not only what faith-based communities are doing, but what are some of the gaps, what are some of the opportunities, and actually why this is a global imperative, not just only for faith-based organizations, but also for multilateral institutions, private sector organizations, and citizens around the world. So you're invited to scan the QR code, download the stocktake. It is currently in draft form, and the reason it's in draft form is part of this meeting serves as that consultation. We'd love to hear your inputs, your thoughts, things that can be improved, conversations you've had at this COP that you think should be better reflected in the stocktake report. Part of this session will be going into that, but also it's an invitation for all of you in organizations to contribute to it one final time. And the way that we thought of the best way to introduce this and to launch this is to feature those stories that are in the stock take. So everyone you see on stage here, and I'll introduce them in a moment, very honored to have been featured as a case study, as a key actor, as their institutional reports featured very prominently in the stock take. These are examples of faith-led land restoration in action. So very honored to introduce our panel today, starting from my right, Dr. Bernadette Arakiwe, who's the Senior Manager for the World Resources Institute's Land Restoration Programs in Africa. And you'll see in the stocktake, WRI are one of the most prominent organizations, both funding and leading real restoration work on the ground in collaboration with faith communities. We then have Mohammed Al Khalid, who's the founder of Net Zero, which is a platform launched to make tree planting accessible, seamless, and transparent for individuals and companies. He'll be having a launch of his new initiative here on the 6th of December. I say this often, I've said this to a lot of people. I think as someone who's from the Gulf, from Bahrain, I've never come across a more innovative company doing land restoration work than Net Zero, and I'm really excited for you to learn more about it today, and especially the work they're doing in Mecca and Medina. Next to Mohammed, we have Sonia Olsen, who's the director of the Burma Kumaris in Denmark, but was instrumental in developing the Burma Kumaris environmental initiatives. And for those who attended the 3 COPs now, you'll see that the Burma Kumaris are the most prominent faith-based organization, I think, across the board. They're really the example of what connected action across the Rio Conventions look like. They're an example of what it means to create a welcoming community in every single space across the COP. And they're an example of what real faith work looks like across land desertification, climate action, and biodiversity in a deep, integrated, and holistic way. And then very honored as well to be joined by Dr. Charles McNeil, who, if for those that attended yesterday in the fireside chat and the earlier panel, is, I think, the person who none of us would really be here in this multilateral space if it weren't for him. For 30 years, he's been a leader at the UN, building multi-stakeholder partnerships to solve global environmental challenges, but also has been the guru and the leader of many a faith led institution and a mentor for all of us in this space. Thank you so much, Dr. Charles, for joining us. I'm going to take a seat down here so it's a little bit easier for me. And I'll start with you, Dr. Bernadette, from WI's perspective. So in the stocktake, we talk a lot about the unique strengths of faith communities that they bring to restoration efforts. Because WI has been doing this for many decades, I want to maybe get your sense of what do you see on the ground as these unique strengths, what the faith communities bring to land restoration efforts today, and how can some of these be better leveraged as well for scaling?
Let me try this one. No, thank you. Thank you for that great question, Tariq, and thank you for having WRI in this session. And you are asking a critical question about, the unique strength of faith-based community in this restoration efforts in Africa. And maybe as just a brief background about the restoration movement in Africa, for those that may not be familiar with it, there are many movements, and one particular movement that WRI is supporting is called AFR 100, the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative. This is a country-led effort to restore 100 million hectares of degraded and deforested lands in Africa by 2030. And this movement has really picked up because so far 34 countries have, made their restoration commitment, which exceed the initial goals. Now we are looking at 128 million hectares committed to this movement. And really, bringing it back to your question, we are increasingly realizing that faith-based community will play or already play an important role in this movement. I looked at the latest statistics and they indicate that at least 90% of the African community identify with certain religious faith, faith, be it Islam, being Christianity, or be it, traditional African religions. And really, these numbers alone, they speak to the power of the faith-based community. And I think another important data point is that when you look at restoration in Africa, all the main success, all the major successes were community-led. And really, again, this creates an opportunity to bridge the faith-based community and the community involved in leading the restoration on the ground to see if you can make, bring those two together for greater impact. Another important point, and I can also refer to my own country, Rwanda, we also know that faith-based community own or manage large land. And this actually provides an opportunity for them to demonstrate what sustainable land management is. Because we also know that one of the ways in which restoration spreads in practice is by demonstrating success. So they really can be at the forefront to demonstrate success, but also help in the maintenance of those restoration intervention. So at WRI, we are really supporting a diverse set of actors, including faith-based organizations. We are currently focusing on 4 main areas that we know will help really steer this movement towards great impact. We are investing in the capacity and capital for these restoration champions, including those faith-based institutions that need that to do better restoration and be able to scale the restoration. We work with various leaders, government, non-government leaders, to work on policies that are inclusive and support restoration plans. We monitor restoration in credible and cost-effective ways. And last and not least, and I believe this is very aligned with this topic of today, we motivate a wide range of actors to ignite a movement on the continent. And here again, the faith-based community are at the center. Maybe let me wrap up my remarks by mentioning 4 main points that I believe capture unique strength, again, of faith-based institution on this restoration journey. The first one is around moral authority or trust and credibility. We know that a lot of faith-based institutions really they emphasize the need for us to care for God's creation and manage it carefully. And it's through that narrative that they can get buy-in from local community that can further support the restoration movement. The faith community of faith leaders also hold positions of power and trust and respect, which really enable them to influence more people, and it can be crucial for overcoming any resistance. So through them, we can influence more change. The second point is around the extensive social network, which again provide an opportunity to reach more community, raise their awareness about the need for restoration, and leverage those networks for further awareness raising, education, and behavioral change. There's a point about, cultural and historical significance. I was here yesterday when one of the panelists talked about, if you look in Ethiopia, some of the remaining forests are managed by faith-based institutions, and that's observable in satellite imagery. That was interesting to hear those successes. And it's really those restoration or those narratives that make restoration efforts relatable to the community and improve the chance of permanence, because if you're attaching that narrative, you're stewarding the land because it's God creation, you were created to take care of God creation, then it has a chance for greater permanence. And I really am emphasizing this point because we tend to hear about restoration intervention that come and go because, again, there's no one who's really investing their efforts and time in maintaining them after the project that funded them end. And maybe the last point is around advocacy and policy change. And this is another area where we know faith-based community are very active, and they are very good at leading to, concrete results that align with the community need and continue to steer our earth towards, greater good. So I'll end it here for now and happy to share more later.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bernadette. Maybe just as a very quick follow-up on some of those restoration interventions. In the stocktake, there was a lot of framing around the need of bridging faith and science together, and particularly restoration science. What have you found are some of the more practical steps that help bridge that gap between this very spiritual connection to the land, as well as readiness around restoration and technical assistance around restoration?
I like that question a lot. It reminds me actually about an interfaith dialogue that I joined in Rwanda last year. That one was really structured around faith, synergy between faith and food loss and food waste. But we know that that's another topic that is closely related to the restoration work. But I'm bringing it up because one of the requests actually from the faith leaders was, how do they partner with institutions such as WRI so that they tap into the latest knowledge, the latest technology, and the latest, let's say, jargon? I think they found like the climate word full of jargon, and maybe also restoration word full of jargon. How do we help them, demystify or like bring that language to the level of the communities that the faith leaders interact with? And I believe that's also one of the strengths of WRI. We are really into applied research, and as much as we do all those like fancy scientific publication, I like that we always also work on articles that are easily digestible to everyone to understand what it is we are talking about. So that's an opportunity that I think we can also bring to this faith and restoration space, where we debunk whatever does not resonate well with the community, bring it into like use the words that the community, the followers understand. That's one area. But another area is really on meaningful partnership. I think we do better when we all come together. So how do we really bring the faith-based institution into all those partnerships that are coming together to address the land degradation challenges? Those are the 2 points. And maybe also highlight some of the success stories that are coming from the faith-based organization. We have a chance that we just recently started to fund 3 faith-based institutions. It's too early to share highlight and data, but I hope in the coming days we'll have some meaningful statistics and data set that we can share to back up some of the claims you are making.
Thank you. That's one really exciting to hear, and we look forward to those outcomes. And that point you mentioned on technology, I think, is something that connects to your work, Mohammed, because your work in Mecca combines digital innovation with sacred site restoration. I want you to maybe share the context of what are you doing in those spaces, and what are those approaches that you're doing to engage in faith-based contexts? Because you're obviously not a faith-based institution like WRI, but actually doing really more than anyone in those spaces to really restore sacred lands.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Tariq. Thank you, G20 Land Initiative, for the invitation and for the opportunity. You rightfully mentioned that I'm not from a faith-based organization, but I'll talk to you from the perspective of entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation. But before I answer the question, I want to share with you a personal story in this regard. So one of the reasons why we started this company, this innovation, is due to a personal story that happened with me and my father. It was when I was 7 years old. My father used to take me outside to walk around the neighborhood and exercise. And as you see in Saudi, it's mostly desert, right? And if you see it in the summer, I think you will not handle it because it's really dusty and it's really hot. And I remember that day very clearly when I was 7 and my father took me out. It was in the middle of the summer. It was hot, humid, dusty. And I asked my father, why are we walking outside? He said, just follow me and you'll see. So I kept following him and I noticed a small seedling in his hand. And I asked him, what are we going to do with this? He said, just follow me and you'll see. And As we were walking, we passed by an empty, barren land. It was a huge land, empty. It was mostly desert. There was no animal, no plant, nothing. So we decided to walk toward the center of that land, and we saw a small pond of water in the middle of the land. It looks like a mini oasis in the middle of a desert. We dug a small hole, and I put the seedling on the ground with my father. We tucked it in. And me, being a naive 7 years old, I thought that once you put the seed, it becomes a tree immediately. So I took a few steps back. I was anticipating. My father saw this and he said, Muhammad, just be patient. He said, do good and forget about it. Don't wait for anything in return. And he said this saying by our Prophet. He said, our Prophet says, and I will say it in Arabic, then I'll translate it. ما من مسلم يزرع غرسا أو زرعة فيأكل منها طير أو بهيمة إلا كان لها بها صدقة. It says that a man, if they plant a seedling or a tree, and any animal or bird eats from this tree, they will have good deeds or charity, because planting trees is considered a charity. And I was shocked by this information. So I did forget about the seedling. I continued living my life. I grew up, I studied, graduated, got a job, had a first child, and more than 20 years passed. And I passed by the same barren land, and I remembered the seedling. And I said, let me go inside and see if it's still there. It was very small when I planted it. It was this big. When I reached in the middle, it was this huge, tremendous tree, and I was standing below it, and I felt the shade embracing me, and it was the best feeling in the world. I immediately felt connected to the tree, and I got goosebumps. I said, this is my tree. So it was right there, and then I remember my father saying, just do good and forget about it. Just do charitable thing. Sometimes small deed can have a massive impact. And this tree was way bigger than me. And 20 years ago, it was smaller than me. So you cannot imagine how a small deed can have a big impact. So at that time, I asked myself, what if everybody in Saudi Arabia planted a tree 20 years ago? How would the kingdom look like right now? And then I kept running around and telling people, we should all plant trees. Let's make Saudi green, Saudi green. And everybody thought I was crazy. Everybody thought that I was mental. Like, who's going to make this desert green? 1 year later, we saw the announcement of the Saudi Green Initiative, which is one of the biggest events that you see. There is also a pavilion. And when I saw this Saudi Green Initiative, I said, oh, okay, there is a movement. And then I saw the target. It's 10 billion trees. I said, whoa. I only said 1 million, and people thought I was crazy. But 10 billion. Then I know that we are on the right path. But how are we going to do it? 10 billion trees. We have to engage everybody. Everyone has to participate. Everyone has to have a hand in this. If we start with the youth, just like what happened with me, if we teach the young people that planting a tree is actually a charity, it's actually a good deed, it is part of our value, it's part of our religion, it's one of the most essential thing in your life is you do good deeds. So we built this net zero. Sorry for taking a long time before I explain what the company is. So what we built is a platform that allows companies to invest in nature. Now, companies want to plant trees, they want to restore ecosystem, but they don't know how and they don't know where. So we help them with that. We provide the land in cities, and we focus on cities because that's where people live, right? And our cities is suffering. So we provide the land, we make agreement with the municipalities, and we enable companies to plant trees in those empty lands. owned by the municipality. Then the companies would say, how do I know that you planted the tree? They said, okay, we'll give you a dashboard and a map that you'll be able to see every tree. Where is it? Who planted it? When it was planted? And you can name it. You can give a tree a name, and you can dedicate it in the name of anybody. So that's what we did. We did the first tree map in the region, and then we developed another technology called Tree Wallet, which basically enables companies to gift the trees to the communities, to people. When we developed Tree Wallet, we wanted to give trees personality. We want to give trees meaning. We want to connect trees with people. So we added some, it started as a joke. We said, what if we can make trees talk, right? Because we have so much data about the tree. We know the location, we know the species, we know a lot of information about the tree. What if we added AI? What would the tree tell us? So we plugged AI and we were shocked. If you ask the tree, how are you doing today? It would say, oh, it's humid. Today it's really hot, the temperature is that. And why don't you come and rescue me? I need water. And sometimes it says, I miss you. It's been a while since you came around. And sometimes it would say, happy birthday, right? We built that connection with people. Now you own trees, but not only trees, you own trees and fence, right? Every single tree that you own has a different personality. It depends on the location, it depends on the age, it depends on many factors. It depends on the weather. If it's hot, it would be upset, or it has a bad attitude. So that type of connection that we want to build between communities and nature. Now, going to the faith and what we've been doing with regards to religious value and engaging faith-based groups and communities. When you go to Mecca, Mecca is the center place for Islam, our religion. Although trees and nature is part of our religion, but if you go to Mecca, it's degraded. It's mostly desert. You don't see much trees. And that begs the question, why? Why nobody is doing that? Then the answer is that nobody has the knowledge and the experience and the capacity and the ability and the accessibility. There's so many barriers to do that deed. So we worked with the municipality in Mecca. We enabled lots of lands, and then we engaged with the people of Mecca. We engaged with school, hospitals, universities, and we gave them an app, and they just fill up the information, and they receive a message that a tree has been planted for you in Mecca. And they would go and visit it. So that type of connection between the people of Mecca with trees really did, I think, a good transformation. People started remembering that trees and nature is part of our religion, and we have an obligation and responsibility to actually be, I would say, the example. Us being in Mecca, we should lead by example, right? We should make our cities green so that pilgrims, when they come all over, they see Mecca as a green city, and they would go back with a message to their countries. That wasn't enough. We started reaching out to the Ministry of Hajj, and we talked to the minister, and we said, let's launch a Hajj programs. We have pilgrims coming from all over the world in millions. Why don't they leave a tree before they go back home? They leave a connection to the land. They leave a good memory. They leave a legacy, right? So we do that with our technology. So I think we built that technology to enable pilgrims, when they come to Mecca and do perform Hajj, they could scan a QR code, fill up their information, and even say some things, and they can request a tree to be planted in Mecca, so that when they go home, they can talk to the tree. So that's what we've been doing in the past 2 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Muhammad, and definitely deserves a round of applause. You told me once where in the harshest conditions, and especially if it's Saudi, the most desertified land, and it's exactly in those spaces that such innovation can come out. And I think you're the best of that, example in this region. And I think also just connecting to WI and Net Zero are both fantastic examples of not traditional faith actors, not faith-based organizations, but really doing the work to partner with these faith-based entities to accelerate its scale. And I think that's exactly what's in the stock take, which is when these partnerships, innovations can happen, you can start to see some of the magic that can unfold. And also with that, I maybe transition to you, Sonia, who are faith-based organizations. In fact, some of the most beautiful and spiritual, and I also encourage you to join their daily meditations as well. Because the Brahma Kumaris have integrated spiritual practices with land restoration and with sustainable agriculture. You found that beautiful balance of what it can look like as a totality. And I wonder if you can share a couple of examples of that, and where does that also come from?
Thank you. Working?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, Brahma Kumaris, we are an international meditation school, and we have our headquarters in India. We have around 6,000 meditation centers in India and a few thousand abroad. And we have a practice called sustainable yogic agriculture. And it's been for about 20 years now in India, managed by the rural wing of the Brahma Kumaris headquarters. And what they have done is they have added the element of meditation to the natural organic farming practice. So, as you know, in India, a massive amount of land has gone totally dead because of overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And in one of our meditation centers was just next to such a vast land, totally dead, not even weed growing. And this brother, in the meditation, in the morning meditation in the center, used to sit there and spread good wishes to the land. He looked out through the window and sent good wishes to the land. And as time passed, things started to grow on the land, and finally, after some time, it became a farmable land. So we put this into practice, into a systematic practice. And what they do is they take the sack of seeds and put them in the meditation room at least for a week. And the seeds stay there, and they absorb these positive, healing, peaceful vibrations. And then they ask the sisters or the brothers from the meditation center to go out to the land and sit there and meditate on the land, on the ground, at least once a week. And this has shown amazing results. Its higher yield percentage is increased nutritional value in the crops. And what also happens is that the well-being of the farmers is increased tremendously. Today we have about 1,000 farming communities, so I put this into a systematic practice. And many of the Indian farmers, feel totally out of control with no land, and they sometimes also have to pay for the seeds. So we know that the suicide rate of the Indian farmers is very, very high. And you feel so hopeless sometimes when you don't have any control of your situation or the outcome of the land. But with this practice, they have an influence on the land, and they take control and enhance livelihoods. So the well-being of the farmers then have increased, and you have also enhanced livelihoods and resilient communities due to this practice. And as we know, in many indigenous and ancient practices, we have this sacred relationship with the land. it's like revived old knowledge. Many old religions and practices, they have some kind of sacred ceremony in harvest or sowing seasons. You have some kind of sacred seed gratitude ceremonies or prayers. It's often connected to harvest, to moon. And so it's not a new practice, it's just put into systematic use, and it's kind of revived. And of course, we also see that this is free of charge. Positive thoughts doesn't cost you anything. So we have a reduced cost for the farmers. And that's a big benefit that comes with it. And we have collaborated with universities, and early studies, as I said, they suggest many benefits in increased nutritional value, for example. And so adding pure and positive thoughts to the farming practice is just been an amazing work.
Thank you so much for bringing that example. And I also want to ask, in our consultation process, we had many faith groups who are sometimes apprehensive about when we do this work that's also very technical, that's maybe scientific, that's agricultural, will it dilute our spiritual practice? When we start to look at restoring the land, does it take the sacredness out of it? And I wonder what's your perspective on finding that balance, and what your advice would be to faith groups to really integrate the spiritual, the sacred as well with restoration.
I like this question very much because in all religions and the spiritual practices, we have a kind of historic divide or dilemma on how much to engage in secular work and how much to engage in silence, prayer, and reflection. All religions have it, and it's historic for all times. And you have sometimes groups who want to focus more on the inner journey, and some groups who want to focus more on helping others, doing service, etc. And I think for all of us here, we also have to watch out for this balance so we don't become stressed, so we don't become tired and give up hope and just stay home and don't come to COP, who is very, very noisy, and you don't get food, no water, and you get tired after 2 weeks. So this is also a personal balance for us, isn't it? So I found my personal experience has been that when I'm close to nature, I feel close to myself and I feel close to God. And I believe all of you have had very nice spiritual insights in nature. And look at the prophets. They often had their connection to God, their revelation in nature. So nature and spiritual experiences are very closely connected. So I just advise everyone to go out every day. Make sure you see the blue sky. In Denmark, it's a gray sky, but still it works. And get the sense of wonder. Stop and feel the rain, see the sun, see the flower. Here you see the palm trees. Take a deep breath and relax. And get that sense of wonder back. And maybe a butterfly passes by, you hear a bird. And I connect to the sacredness of being alive, to breathe, to come close to myself and the spiritual principles in our lives. And we need that sense of wonder to continue both our spiritual journey and the journey of service and bringing health back. And the other practice I found that working with our environment initiative now for over 15 years, I have been forced to understand the intricate balance between mind and matter. And that has been a very rewarding journey. And I think that many of us think maybe thoughts are just too many thoughts. We think up to 100 thoughts, 100,000 thoughts per day, and the thoughts are too many, and they comment on what's happening. But in reality, every thought we have can shape and create our reality. So when I have pure, positive, spiritual thoughts, I will create my own reality in that way. And when we do it collectively, we will finally create a future sustainable world full of peace and love. And when we go there, we find that there is no dilemma between secular and spiritual time and practice. In the end, it's about peace, love, and healing. And my heart is restored and the land is restored.
Thank you. The thought that I have now is if I did as a practice, every time I saw a palm tree, of which there are many around me, and I took a deep breath, it would make my life much, much better. Thank you so much, Sonia, for such a beautiful weaving and reflection. And I want to pick up on one of the points you briefly mentioned around Indigenous communities. And I'll move to you, Dr. Charles, because in the stock take, there's a lot of recommendations that came through of the need for building coalitions between faith groups and Indigenous groups and Indigenous spiritualities. And in particular, this is something that may be important lead up to COP30 in Brazil. You're someone through the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative that have come at the heart and core of both of these communities. And it's not an easy coalition to build, given the many complexities. And I wonder what your thoughts are on this and what does that look like over the next year in the build up to COP30?
Great. Well, thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm just reflecting here. 32 years ago, I started at the United Nations after a career as a biologist and scientist. And I was there. My first assignment was supporting the Rio Earth Summit. And I saw the Biodiversity Convention, the Climate Convention, the Desertification Convention created. And in those next 32 years, my focus has been on implementing two of those conventions, biodiversity and climate, but I've ignored this one. And I'm sort of ashamed to say that after 32 years, I'm gratified to say after 32 years, I feel like I've finally understood and appreciated this land agenda and how it's intimately connected to the biodiversity and the climate agenda. So I feel somehow really gratified and glad to be here and grateful for this initiative that Tariq and Gopal have led to really bring the three conventions together. And they brought me to that realization. So I'm grateful for that. And I never expected after 25 years in the UN that my career would take the sharp turn that it took. And that's when the head of the UN Development Program at the time asked me to take on this project called the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative to collaborate with faiths on one or two focus areas, protecting tropical forests and protecting the rights of indigenous peoples. And so the last 7 years have been a journey along those lines. And I have to say, that tropical forest agenda is a part of the land management agenda. But our focus has been on preventing these iconic forests from being destroyed in the first place. In the Amazon, those forests have been evolving for 55 million years. So when you cut them down, you've eliminated an experiment that's been going on for 55 million years. But my take-home message is the work that we've done on that part of land management, tropical forests, indigenous people's rights, the lessons we've learned are very much applicable to the experience of land. And so that's why I'm so encouraged by what Tariq and Gopal have done here, because I think there's an opportunity now to apply all that we've learned on other areas of focus onto this absolutely critical issue of land management. And so I'm gratified and I want to participate in that. I'd also like to say that it isn't about working with religious leaders to be the implementers of our work. We have so much to learn from the faith leaders. And as I said, my career took a sharp turn, and it's been a great experience to collaborate with all the faiths across the world, and I've learned a lot, and so that's been very gratifying. I also want to say that this stocktake report that Tariq, you and Gopal and the team have done is just amazing. It's a brilliant piece of work from my perspective, and I've spent 32 years writing it and reviewing reports, so I know something about that. And this report really rocks. And so I hope we'll talk a little bit more about this later. I have some thoughts about that, but I've been really impressed and look forward to talking about that. Now back to your question about indigenous peoples. For me, the biggest discovery from our work, working with faiths in tropical forests, has been the way religious leaders and indigenous leaders have begun to collaborate for really the first time in 500 years. And I think I mentioned yesterday that that's been the most gratifying development to see the way these two critical constituencies, indigenous peoples, it's well known, there's scientific evidence that's overwhelming that the most effective way to protect forests, to protect biodiversity, to protect climate, protect land, is to invest in the rights of indigenous peoples over their land. And when we're seeing now religious leaders who have tremendous political influence, moral authority, economic power, when those assets are brought to bear in support of indigenous peoples instead of against them, which has been the pattern for 500 years, that's a game changer. That creates a whole new potential. So I am encouraged by what will come next, the climate meeting in Brazil next year. And I do think it's a big opportunity to convene religious leaders and indigenous leaders there in Berlin, and there's some steps we can take between now and then to really make that work. But I've been encouraged by what I've seen so far. So maybe I'll stop there, and just one comment about the planting of the tree. That was quite a fortunate planting experiment that you did, and it's miraculous. But as we all know, most of the time when you just plant a seed, it doesn't survive. So that's why it's so important to have guidance on how to grow trees and not just plant trees. And so I just wanted to mention that the UN Environment Program and BirdLife and WWF and WCS and Joining Trees have produced a tree growing guide for conservation. So if you want some technical guide in how to make sure this happens with your plantings, then I can help you with that. But I'll stop there and look forward to coming back on further questions.
Thank you, Charles. And maybe just as a quick follow-up to that, given the existing guidance, given the resources, given I highlighted the immense infrastructure and potential faith-based communities, why aren't we seeing more restoration and land restoration action? What do you think are some of those reasons?
It's a really good question. Why? Because it seems to me the evolution of faith, religious leaders and faith communities into this space sort of has happened from the climate space. Pope Francis was Laudato Si and other initiatives back in 2015, and so and then that interest has moved, thanks in large part to you, Tariq and Gopal, into the biodiversity space. So climate, biodiversity, and now here we are in the land space. So I think it's a partially an education question that people can see most immediately the climate impacts. We're seeing them in the floods, droughts, fires, heat waves. So that assault is more obvious, perhaps, and so that's galvanized the interest of faith leaders. That the biodiversity issue is more subtle. It's equally threatening, but it's more subtle. And then the land issue, even more subtle and more foundational. So I think it's partially of an education issue, and that's why I welcome this forum and this discussion and your initiative to elevate. And as I said, after 32 years in the UN, I'm finally understanding this issue. And so I'm hoping others will pick up on that as well and grow the movement. Because I do think it's possible for there to be a faith movement on land, and even a faith revolution on land. And that's my new inspiration, having been here and been part of this, is that that's the potential that I see.
And we are with you in that movement, Charles. Thank you. And I think maybe also to build on that and to touch on some of the stocktake recommendations, that whilst we sort of conducted a survey and 92% had said that they did have a strong commitment to land restoration, and there was a number of recommendations that came from these multiple stakeholders. So I'm going to mention the top three that were most common. Which were establishing a global faith restoration fund mechanism. So establishing a fund or mechanism of sorts, both to channel existing faith-based assets into land restoration activities, but also making sure that we're able to get the vast philanthropic and private sector money as well into verified faith-based projects, whether that be from faith-based organizations or initiatives like Net Zero. We also had something around establishing a faith restoration technical assistance center, where faith-based communities needed this dedicated facility of technical restoration experts that would come in and support the setup of these large-scale restoration initiatives, as well as overseeing the monitoring, the development, and making sure that sapling does indeed lead to the tree, does indeed lead to a community initiative. And the third was faith restoration leadership programs. And these were both for the faith-based leaders, your imams, rabbis, sheikhs, your nuns, but also really for those faith executives, those that are actually leading the executive offices of these very large-scale organizations. And I want to maybe put an open question to all of you. From these recommendations, which of those do you see as urgent? Which are maybe some that are missing that you feel actually should be put forward, as this is actually what's required to scale faith-based restoration? I'll keep it open to whoever wants to maybe first sort of jump in. Sonia?
Yeah. In Brahma Kumaris, we had a very good leader, faith leader, Dadi Janki. She became 100 years old, and she supported our environment initiative right from the very beginning, even though some of the middle management sometimes are hesitant on certain things. And I find that when the leadership in an institution goes ahead with restoration programs, the money will flow, and also the technical assistance will flow, because that's connected to money and to resources and to people. So I can only, in my experience, what has worked in our organizations is to train and educate the leadership, and then the rest will follow.
I have those recommendations in your report, and I think they're very thorough, very comprehensive, very creative and insightful. I was deeply impressed by the recommendations, and I hear you on the top three that you've mentioned: the fund, technical assistance, and a leadership program. And I think many of the other recommendations add up to something that I think could be helpful, which I might call supporting action coalitions. And I say that because in my own experience with the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, what I've seen happen is in the 5 major countries with tropical forests, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Indonesia, and Democratic Republic of Congo, I've seen action coalitions emerge where faith leaders of all kinds, together with the indigenous leaders, have formed a council that, with some funding and have been able to make incredible things happen, influence legislation and laws at the local, regional, and national level. And so I think there's a huge potential for that. Action coalitions on the land degradation, desertification, desertification agenda. I think there's some big potential for that. I'd love to see it in around the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree that those recommendations are very comprehensive, and I would like to emphasize the one framed around, bringing their asset into restoration because, again, of the statistics of, their the access to land that the faith-based institution have and how it can be used as an opportunity to demonstrate successful restoration. But I'm also thinking about them really supporting directory restoration. If there's one theme that is going around at this COP is that there is a lot of good things happening. There are a lot of positive things happening. And the more of those we have, the more we demonstrate that it's actually possible. It's actually possible to reverse land degradation, and really faith-based community joining in that with the demonstration, not only on the coalition or the asset side, but also really directly supporting implementation. I think it can really help move the needle.
Thank you. Mohammed, any?
I agree with all of you that the recommendations are comprehensive. To me personally, I think it's all about remembering the responsibility and the obligation. I think all of us know deep down that restoration, positive impact on the environment is part of our values, part of our faith. But we often forget. We often get busy in our life, the rush of our life. But I think it's time that faith-based organizations or group keep reminding people to remember that these acts are part of their faith. I'm really excited about this pilgrim program because millions of people will come to do a Hajj ritual, and we want to include part of the ritual the act of leaving a good deed, planting a tree, so that they can remember. When they go back home, they go back with a transformative mindset, right? They came here for a mission, and when they go back home, they remember that restoration is part of our faith. Restoration is part of our identity. So when I go back home, I hope that we plant a seed in them, and then when they go back home, they can spread that seed all over the world. I think it's a great opportunity, and I think we're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mohammed. And I think with that, I'll open to the audience. As an open question of, I guess, what is it that we should remember? What are the other maybe recommendations that you have as well that we should consider in scaling faith-based land restoration? And of course, if you have a question to such an inspiring panel, you're open to also ask that as well. And I have someone in the back. I don't know if you have roving mics, maybe in the back here first, and then to Dinesh. And if you can also introduce yourself as well.
My name is Mehnaz Kadumi. I'm from Bahrain Women Association, Environmental Citizenship Program. I thank you for everything that you have talked about. It's so inspiring. It just, I have a concern about using the word faith. Because, there was mention of faith leaders, religion leaders. Is it as restoration or environment conservation is basically the roles of these, these categories, and people learn from them? I think if we can use sorry, I didn't get your name.
Muhammad.
Muhammad. Values and ethics are part of faith. So if we can just say engaging values and ethical groups, this way we will have diversity of people coming in, especially the youth. Because the moment youth hear faith group, it's like this is for elderly people or with older generation. This has nothing to do with us. We go with tech and things like that. I think in every human being of us, they have instilled faith and value that God had, instilled in every human being. They need to take it out. So this is my only concern, because not every religion leader is environmental conservative. Thank you.
I wonder if maybe before we go to the next question, just because I know that's a topic you've probably all discussed as well between yourselves. I don't know if anyone wants to maybe make a comment on that and reflection.
I'm, as I've said, I'm no expert on religions or faiths, but somehow we haven't encountered that problem before. That in the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America where I've worked, the various religious leaders were sometimes refer to themselves as faiths and sometimes in other ways. So I appreciate the point, but I haven't encountered that as an issue in where I've been working. But I certainly hear you and appreciate that.
To me, in my experience, I never heard about the faith-based organization and restoration before I started knowing Tariq and I started seeing these events that they do and talks that they do, and it really inspired me because I realized that there are different types of leaders, right? They're leading different organizations, and actually they have their own capacity, their own respect, and their own followers. And I think they have the capacity and the accessibility to share that knowledge with the people that they have access to. So faith-based organization now sitting here and hearing from all respectable and distinguished speakers, I have hundreds of ideas now of how faith groups can engage with the community more and can interact with the community and spread awareness. I'm really excited to continue that discussion outside of the panel to see how we could take that experience that we here in the kingdom and share it with different faith. We want to see every church, every synagogue, every temple that have these kind of interaction with nature through technology, and I think we can achieve that.
Thank you. Over here, and then to Dinesh.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ananya. I'm a climate scientist.
You speak up better.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I'm Ananya. I'm a climate scientist and a part of the Heartfulness Institute. And my question was to all of you. I mean, the words, of course, as ma'am put it earlier, the words as faith or value, ethics matter less, I guess, when it comes to the youth. But my perspective is, from your end, how difficult or easy has it been to approach, say, the community or companies for funding? I mean, this becomes the crux of all that we talk about, right? I mean, the greening, all of it requires a lot of funds. And when it comes to getting funds, how tough is it or easy is it to approach from a spiritual or a faith perspective and talk about greening?
I mean, that's a really good question, and it's very difficult actually to get fund. But I think maybe we cracked the code because we managed to get good funds. I think it's all about storytelling. Whenever you do any project, you have to build a story around it. How is it impacting the community? What's the impact of this project? And if it's a really compelling story that moves people, they tend to give you money, not because of the project, because they believe in the story and they want to be part of this story. And that's what we do in Net Zero. We don't say we're going to plant trees, or we don't say we're going to do a restoration project. We create the story and then ask the fund, how is this initiative going to help people? How this initiative is going to be sustainable, not in terms of environmental sustainability, but sustainable for generation. How every dollar you spend has a 10 times ROI, return of investment, not in terms of monetary value, but in terms of social value, in terms of feel-good value, in terms of even spirituality. Like I know some, I don't know if we're abusing this, but some of the people that we go, especially elder people, religious people, who say, why don't you help us fund this project? We're going to plant hundreds of thousands of trees. Imagine how many good deeds we're going to get. So they like that, and they would love to invest just for the good deed, just for the spirituality aspect, not for the money value. So creating the story, I think, is the key on getting investment.
Yeah, I would like to react to both questions. And my thoughts are, there's a lot of land degradation happening across the globe. And really, for the solution to be successful, we need all hands on deck. Really, I think this is how I'm seeing this. And I really appreciate the comment. And I'm thinking, really, the use of faith, and I agree with you, I haven't actually seen a problem with the use of faith, mostly because it's one of the group of stakeholders that contribute to reversing land degradation. Yes, there's also youth. There are various categories of stakeholders involved in the movement. And like we have all been sharing, we also know that the faith-based actors, institutions, they are, so many of them, they have access to, they manage a lot of assets, and they could provide that opportunity to even contribute further to the movement. And I like your other question because that's where I was headed also with my remarks. But first of all, I want to say that, faith-based institutions are involved in the financing of restoration activities at various levels. Like we have some examples where those actors are distributing free seedlings to within their communities so that communities can take those trees back home and grow them and nurture them. Of course, if that distribution is, parallel to, like, the teaching, the awareness raising, that it's not just, you're not going to just throw the tree there, you have to nurture it. It really leads to more effective results. But we also know that faith-based institutions are very charitable. So how do we also orient their charity to some of these restoration needs, financial needs? I think that's where I was headed also with my comments. So there's still great potential there.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that question about funding, because my experience is that in my work, that in order to facilitate the gathering the various religions, we needed some additional funds because the activities and the time was above and beyond what these groups normally do. So with some catalytic funds, we were able to create something very different and new. And so funds are essential. And in our case, the government of Norway was very generous and very committed and very visionary to go outside their normal funding partners to invest in this. And I certainly hope that governments here and foundations here will actually take advantage of this opportunity, because there is an opportunity now to grow, to build this movement. And the funding is central. So thank you for raising that question. It's challenging, and it shouldn't be. And we have an opportunity here. So I hope governments and foundations step up.
And can I get a microphone? Oh, you already have one here.
Yeah.
A final question from Dinesh, and we'll wrap up.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. So I would, to your efforts from the WRI to somehow help consolidate various documentation and research on evidence of faith community engaged in these good practices, including on land restoration. I think it's really important because we as faith communities are, there is not enough documented and well-researched evidence of engaging. So WRI is a great step forward in partnership of religion and development. We are doing a mapping process where in documenting at least 200 faith-based organizations engaged in ecological issues and many on land restoration. Can we have all these in a searchable one place somewhere easy to find? That's one. And to you, Mohammed, I'm so glad you're using AI technology to initiate or engage people to connect with trees. That's great. But from faith perspective, we have a little problem to say sort of own the tree versus caring for the tree. Otherwise, the whole creation belongs to God and we don't own it. So maybe update some of those in your campaign and company would be great. Thank you.
I think we have a minute left, so I'm going to ask for very quick fire responses back. Maybe for me, Brindat, and then Mohammed.
Yeah, I think a quick answer would be yes. We actually like to make, our data information easily accessible to the public. And I know, at least for the work that I lead, the portfolio that we are putting together, we always tag the various projects we are funding per various criteria. So I can see that, faith-led or faith-based could be another criteria. Of course, if we also confirm that with the group that we are working with, then we can continue to work with CARIC, the faith-based. We have a faith and sustainability initiative within our equity center to really expand that database. You said it's already happening, but we can contribute more data to it. Yes. Yeah.
And final word to you, Mohammed.
I agree with you. I think we have a long way to go. There's areas for improvement. The AI thing is just to simulate like communication. To be honest, it's really surprising the response that we get, and it's a fun thing to do. It started as a joke between the team. We said let's see what if we plug in AI with the tree, what would it say? And the responses were really cool, nice, and we said let's open it to the people, to the public. And we received screenshots from several people showing different types of interaction with the tree that keeps amusing us. And I think that's a really cool touch of using technology to simulate communication with nature. I don't know how it might seem creepy in the future. I agree, but we will stop it when it reaches that point.
And I really invite you to join us on the 6th of December, I believe at 4 p.m.
On the 6th of December, on the 4th, at 4 p.m., we're going to launch a new product. It's not only in the tree planting, but it's on the ecosystem restoration. We want to look at entire lands, how we can restore lands, how instead of planting trees, we can plant microclimates, right, all over the kingdom. So that's what we're going to do, inshallah.
It'll be taking place here at the G20 Pavilion. So please, in that time, download the stock take, have a read of it. If you have any recommendations, we'll be here and look forward to hearing your feedback. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.